Hello, my name is Pamela Powers, the Tucson Progressive. Today is January 4, 2024. It's my first video and my first Substack of the new year. So, 2024 looks to be a wild ride in the U.S. and in the state of Arizona. In fact, in just a few days, on January 8, 2024, on Monday, it will be the opening day of the second session of the 56th Legislature for the state of Arizona. So, they have a lot of tough decisions to make this year. The legislature always has sort of crazy things that they do and mundane things that they do, and then also very tough decisions every session. But this year, they have a lot of tough decisions to make because they are starting the session a projected $1 billion in the hole. How did that happen? You might remember that a year ago, they were rolling in cash and they were fighting about how they were going to spend all the cash because the Republicans have it in their head that anytime there's a surplus, they have to get that money out the door. And so that's exactly what happened in 2023. And so they had a $2 billion surplus in January 2023. And in January 2024, we are $1 billion in the hole. Way to go. So there were multiple forces at work that brought us to this current situation with dire financial choices in the future. And I suggest in my Substack article that there are a lot of bad laws passed by the legislature since the Tea Party took over with Jan Brewer and Russell Pierce in the early 2010s. Lots and lots of bad bills have been passed that make our current situation worse. And so there is a lot that can be repealed, in my opinion, that would help our current situation in finance and also in housing affordability. So that's what I focus on this particular video and in my Substack. What can we get rid of? What laws can be repealed? So the way they made the deal in 2023 with Governor Hobbs was that Speaker of the House Toma kept saying, well, let's just give everybody some money to spend, and then that way they'll all agree on the budget, because the Republican majority in the legislature was not agreeing with the Democratic Governor, Katie Hobbs, who had been in office just a few months. And so they were kind of at loggerheads over multiple things, including the budget, and eventually they had some concessions, and Hobbs agreed to letting legislators spend money on whatever they wanted, pretty much. And in fact, there was a recent news story that the state of Arizona got sued over an earmark of $15 million put up by two Republican legislators to support a rodeo in Prescott. So literally, they could put the money up for anything. So they blew the entire $2 billion of surplus last year in those pork barrel spending projects, showed no planning, basically. I mean, even Robert Robb, who's a former Arizona Republic columnist who's a conservative, he was even getting on their case for spending all this. And so some of the Democrats went along, some of the Democrats complained about it later because priorities were not funded that they wanted to see funded. So that explains how we got rid of the $2 billion surplus in 2023. But how did we get $1 billion in the hole going into the future? Well, that is also the result of bad policies pushed through the legislature by the Republican majority and championed by Speaker of the House Ben Toma when he was majority leader under Speaker Bowers. And so those things are passage of the flat tax in part of the Christmas tree budget of 2021, which was, again, set up where the Republicans are really good at this. They all lock arms and they say, okay, I'll vote for your bad idea if you vote for my bad idea, and they all jump off the cliff at the same time. So the flat tax was stuffed into that budget along with a lot of other things and survived a lawsuit against that budget. In 2022, the other thing that was championed by Toma was getting a cap off of the empowerment scholarship awards. And so both of those things are draining the funds of the state of Arizona, and they will both increase and continue to drain funds into the future. So I suggest in my Substack is that we need to get rid of the pork barrel spending. We need to get rid of the empowerment scholarships or dramatically cap them, because right now it's just shown to be something that subsidizes rich kids to go to private and religious schools and is not helping poorer students or even middle-class students. They're still going to public school, and funds are being drained from public school by the empowerment scholarship. So those have got to go or be dramatically changed and evaluated for effectiveness. And lastly is to get rid of some of those pork barrel spending projects, particularly the ones like the rodeo that are written to get around the gift clause. In fact, I laughed out loud when I read that story about the state getting sued over trying to overreach on the gift clause, because the state does that all the time. Just look at the specialty license plates. We have over 60 specialty license plates, and those laws that created those license plates were written specifically to benefit one charity, and that charity gets a perpetual stream of funding from the government forever. They are unvetted. Those should be gotten rid of also. And so flat tax, ESAs, pork barrel spending, including the specialty license plates. And lastly, needs to do an audit on all of the tax breaks. That was supposed to be being done all along in the last 13 years, but was hardly ever done. So we need to look and see on how all those tax breaks are performing. Is the state of Arizona actually getting a return on investment, or are we just giving money away? Because I believe we're just giving money away. So there's a lot of ways we can fix that balance sheet, but we have to have the political will to do it. So on the housing end, there are also a lot of bad bills that have been passed in the last 10 or 13 years that make housing less affordable. And so I am suggesting, in order to solve the affordable housing crisis, that we look at ending preemption, and then we look at keeping people housed. So in the ending preemption category, the first preemption bill that I would get rid of is the old SB 1487 from 2015 from John Kavanaugh. This is the worst preemption bill in the country, and this is the one that infamously says any legislator can complain about any local law and get the Attorney General to investigate what the municipality is doing and potentially take down the local law. So that's how the legislature got rid of the plastic bag ban in Bisbee, and how it got rid of the gun buyback plan in Tucson. So that stifles creativity on the local level. So SB 1487 has got to go. Next, there's also a few specific housing regulations that are preemption bills. For example, there is a preemption against inclusionary zoning. Now, this means, like, for example, if a developer is building a big apartment complex, that a certain percent of it has to be low income or affordable, and then the rest can be market rate. You used to hear the city council talk about this all the time. Well, the reason they don't talk about it anymore is that the legislature preempted it and made it illegal. We should bring back inclusionary zoning. The other thing that is also illegal in the state of Arizona is rent control. There is a preemption against rent control. The other thing that is not controlled is how much rent can go up. And so I also believe that we should have a 10% year-to-year cap on raising rents. Right now, there are no controls over rents being raised. And when I was in office, I heard far too many stories from people who had their rent doubled in a year because their apartment complex got purchased. Now, this happened to me. As a legislator, I had to rent an apartment every year for 6 years. So I was constantly looking for apartments and moving in and out. So I had a lot of experience with renting in Phoenix, and it was awful. And I saw even like one year, the rent of my little studio apartment, near downtown went up 50% from the time I moved out on June 30th to the next December when I was looking for another apartment. It popped up again, and it was 50% more than it was 6 months earlier because it was sold. And so what the corporations are doing is they own these massive apartment complexes, and they're constantly churning the market by buying and selling them. And a lot of people get pushed out of those apartment complexes, even though they didn't want to move, because they can't afford the new rent. And that's not fair. Last but not least, we need more transparency in leases. The other thing that I found when I was a renter off and on for 6 years when I was a legislator is that leases had changed dramatically in the years since I've been a homeowner. And especially these corporate leases, they're like 50 pages long, and there's lots of things that the person has to sign off on, and the fees are not necessarily transparent in the leases. And we need more transparency in the leases, and we need more transparency in the what I call gotcha clauses. So, for example, in the fees, there was one year where I showed up at the leasing office with my 2 helpers and my furniture in the truck to sign the lease. And I had rented the apartment sight unseen online and had conversations with the woman at the front desk. And there was a $200 fee for a smart apartment. And I said, "What's that fee?" And she says, "Oh, you have a smart apartment." And I said, "Well, what is that?" And she said, "That means that there are sensors in the apartment that show you how much electricity you're using, and also you can get in and out of your apartment with your cell phone." And I said, "Well, when I come home, my smartphone doesn't necessarily have a charge." And I said, "And I don't want the sensors, and I don't want that fee." And she said, "Do you want the apartment? Because the fee is not optional." She said, "You can not sign up for the app for the smart apartment, but you cannot get out of the payment." So all of a sudden, I had a $200 fee that I didn't know about. There was also a $75 fee for valet garbage when the dumpster was like 20 feet from my apartment, but I couldn't waive the valet garbage. I mean, it was absurd, some of the fees that I had to pay as a renter. So we need to have more transparency and some control over these fees that are in the leases. And as far as like the gotcha clauses, in the many of the leases that I signed in the state of Arizona or in Phoenix with these corporate apartment buildings, these are leases that these corporations have countrywide. They're nationwide leases. They're not tailored to the laws in Arizona. For example, in a lot of them, there was an anti-cannabis sign-off page saying that you wouldn't use cannabis in the apartment. You know, there was a separate one even for like illegal drugs, and sign here. And by the way, you can get evicted if we catch you, right? And so that's entrapment. That's a gotcha clause. As far as I'm concerned, anything that is legal to use in the state of Arizona should be legal to use in an apartment in the state of Arizona. There was nothing about cigarettes, so it wasn't about smell from somebody smoking pot. You could smoke your cigarettes in the apartment. You could drink all the alcohol and other legal drugs like caffeine and opioids you wanted to take, but not cannabis. And so that's not fair. That's entrapment. That's a way for them to evict somebody they decide they don't like. And so the problem with the evictions is that, and the sales of these big apartment complexes, is that it churns the market. And so every time a big apartment complex is sold, or every time they evict somebody, they get to get somebody in. And when they get somebody in, they get all these fees. They get an application fee and maybe a pet fee, and they get, an amenity fee. Or like one year I got a location fee because I was on the first floor. Well, as far as I was concerned, in an apartment building with no elevator, the people on the second floor should have got a deep discount. I mean, I was really surprised that again, I get to sign the lease, and all of a sudden, on top of the rent that I thought I was paying, and the known charges like the application fee or whatever, all of a sudden there was a location fee because I was on the first floor. So we need controls on this, because you think about it. I mean, some of these apartment complexes that I rented from, there was one that had 17 complexes in Maricopa County and like 500 nationwide. So you look at how many $200 smart apartment fees they're collecting. That is an enormous amount of money that you're paying for the apartment complex to do surveillance on your apartment, because there was a clause in there that said they're going to collect it, they're going to use it, they're going to sell it, and by the way, sign right here, because you are paying $200 to give away your data on how you live in your apartment, including when you come and go. So we need a lot more transparency in leases, obviously. I also think that we should have property tax and rental support for seniors through the Housing Trust Fund. We should fully support the Housing Trust Fund, which we haven't been doing, and we should fully fund TANF. Our TANF is stuck in 1992, and it should be brought to the present. If we gave people money to live on, maybe they could pay their rent. So there's lots of ideas, lots of things that could be enhanced, and a lot of things that could be repealed to improve our state's finances and also to improve housing. So, Happy New Year. It's time to get to work. Tell the legislature to do their jobs, and remember to vote on RTS for the bills you like or the bills you don't like. So, stay tuned.